Shalom and good morning all. We start a very important book of the Bible, the book of Daniel. Today is chapters 1 to 3 and its introduction. I've titled it The Empire Prophecies because in this we are told about the four prominent historical empires of Israel. Okay, Daniel was a nobleman of Israel, possibly a prince, who was taken to Babylon in the first deportation, 605 BC. Probably while in his early teens. We read this in Daniel chapters 1 verses 3 and 4. His ministry lasted the entire length of the Babylonian exile and some of the Persian Empire takeover of Babylon. He worked in both their governments. His last dated prophecy being made in 536 BC when Daniel was in his 80s. The meaning of Daniel's name, My God is Judge, is certainly in harmony with the overall theme of the book, the sovereignty of God. This book describes current and future world conflicts as they apply to Israel, but God's control over all events is clearly demonstrated. Daniel is probably the most highly organized book in Scripture. Some attribute this to the fact that near the end of his life, Daniel rewrote and organized the whole book, into one consolidated message. The intricate arrangements of the ideas in the book demonstrates the extraordinary wisdom of Daniel. We see this in Daniel chapters 1 verse 17, verse 19, verse 20, chapters 4 verse 9, chapters 5 verse 11. The things that appear in Daniel's visions, such as the great statue, the beast, the angelic messengers, and the description of God's glory, are very similar to the things that are portrayed in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation cannot be properly interpreted, without a general knowledge of the book of Daniel. Remembering to apply the prophecies and history as told to Daniel to Israel's, thy people, as he calls them. Material from every chapter of Daniel is either quoted or alluded to in Revelation, and only 2 chapters in Revelation do not have some background in Daniel. Daniel is also a book about conviction and integrity, showing God is the revealer of mysteries and reigns over all the kingdoms of men. Believers would do well to be like Daniel. Reading from verse 1 of chapter 1. Now, for those of you who don't know how to do this, to make sure that you see I'm giving our understanding of what is written rather than my opinion, I'll read out the relevant verses and then I'll comment on them. If you disagree, you can hear that you've got the actual scripture to go back to. You are supposed to be reading the whole chapters yourself in any case. But the main point is for both of us to come to an understanding of what the verse says rather than use our own interpretation. So, Daniel chapter 1 verse 1, Daniel taken to Babylon. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And Yahweh gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasure house of his God. And the king spoke unto Hashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, and of the king's seed, and of the princes. That's why I said Daniel was a prince, verse 4. Children in whom was no blemish, but well favoured, and skillful in all wisdom, and cunning in knowledge, and understanding science, and such as had ability in them to stand in king's palace, and whom they might teach the learning and the tongue of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed them a daily provision of the king's meat and of the wine which he drank, so nourishing them 3 years, that at the end thereof they might stand before the king. Now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, unto whom the prince of the eunuchs gave names, for he gave unto Daniel the name Belshazzar, and unto Hananiah Shadrach, and unto Mishael Meshach, and onto Azariah Abednego. Verse 8, Daniel's faithfulness. But Daniel purposed in his heart, notice that you've got to purpose things in your heart. Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favour and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. As I said, read it all for yourself. I'm going to jump to verse 19. And the king communed with them, and among them none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king, and in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. And Daniel continued even on to the first year of King Cyrus. That's the empire thing. So basically the bishop said it was agreed that Daniel would not have to eat the king's food, but eat pulse and drink water. The third year of Joachim is the same as the fourth year of Jehoiakim, as spoken of in Jeremiah chapter 25 verse 1. Jeremiah counted the accession of the king in the Judean method, and Daniel the Chaldean method of Babylon. In chapter 1 verse 7, the meaning of the 4 Hebrew names affirm Yahweh, God's sovereignty and mercy. Daniel means God is judge. Hananiah, God is gracious. Azariah, God is my help. Mishael, who is like God. The meaning of the new names given to them contradict the truth of their original names. Daniel becomes Belshazzar. Bel will protect, Bel being a god of the Babylonians. Hananiah becomes Shadrach, inspired by Aku. Mishael becomes Meshach, belonging to Aku. Azariah becomes Abednego, servant of Nego. As I stated before, changing names of prominent people was only done for relevant reasons. God changed Abram's, Sarai's, and Jacob's. Here the Babylonian king changed Daniel's and colleagues to reflect his gods. It is one reason why we should call God's son by his given name, Yeshua, and not Jesus, and God also by his name, Yahweh, Jehovah, however you want to pronounce it, and not Lord. Remember these verses that referred to their gods in Isaiah, for example, Isaiah chapter 46 verse 1, which says, Bel bowed down, Nebo stooped. The idols were upon the beast and upon the cattle. Your carriages were heavy laden. They are a burden to the weary beast. Jeremiah 50 verse 2. Declare you among the nations, and publish and set up a standard. Publish and conceal not. Say Babylon is taken. Bel is confounded. Merodach is broken in pieces. Her idols are confounded. Her image are broken in pieces. Jeremiah 51 verse 44. And I will punish Bel in Babylon, and I will bring forth out of his mouth that which he has swallowed up. And the nations shall not flow together any more unto him. Yea, the wall of Babylon shall fall. So those are prophecies against the gods of Babylon. Continue now from Daniel chapters 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream, reading from verse 1. Again, I'm just going to read a few verses. And in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamt dreams, wherewith his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians and the astrologers and the sorcerers and the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. Verse 4. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac means Syrian language, O king, live forever, tell thy servants the dream, and we will show thee interpretation. As we read the account, note to interpret is not to translate one sound or language into another, but explain the meaning of vision or story as Joseph did in Genesis chapters 40 verse 12 when he was in prison and the baker and the other person, servant, told them their dreams. Everyone understood the dream, but Joseph was able to explain what it meant. Genesis chapters 40 verse 12 plus. In chapters 2 verse 4 above, all could understand the story told to them in the Syriac language this time, but not what it meant. Speakers of today's tongues misunderstand Paul's use of interpret or interpreter, for example in 1 Corinthians chapters 14 verses 27 and 28. Wrongly following an error and a conception of the Pentecostal founders, thinking interpret is a non-human language, or so I think in tongues a non-human language or sounds that needs to be translated. No interpretation was needed in Acts chapter 2, on which they based their origins, the day of Pentecost. For example, Acts chapters 2 verses 6 has in it, because that every man heard them speak in his own language, and they were all amazed and marveled, saying one to another, Behold, are not all these which speak Galileans? And how hear we every man in our own tongue wherein we were born? And to see also how it works, we're going to get a good example in chapters 2 verse 36 below, where the story of what the dreams told by the king to everybody, and so they all understand the language, but only Daniel was able to explain what it means, in other words, interpret the meaning of the dream. So continuing from Daniel chapter 2 verse 10. The Chaldeans answered before the king and said, There is not a man unto the earth that can show the king's matter. Therefore there is no king, lord, nor ruler that asks of such things at any magician or astrologer or Chaldean. And it is a rare thing that the king requireth, and there is none other that can show it before the king, except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this cause the king was angry and very furious, and commanded to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain. Then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, which was gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. Verse 16. So he asked him, what is all this about? Why is this thing done in haste? Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time, and that he would show the king the interpretation. Verse 17. God reveals Nebuchadnezzar's dream to Daniel, and Daniel explains it to the king. Verse 17. Then Daniel went to his house and made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they would desire mercies of the God of heaven concerning this secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changeth the times and the seasons. He removeth kings, he setteth up kings, he giveth wisdom unto the wise, and the knowledge to them that know understanding. I'm going to pause here because I did write an article before. I can't remember where I talked about something to get understanding. God give wisdom to the wise, not wisdom to the foolish. And I remember when I commented, when God got the people to make the tabernacle in Moses' time, he put his spirit in the wise-hearted who had a skill to do things. So not that God can't use the ignorant or foolish people, but here we have another example where God puts wisdom in the wise. And we know the saying, the beginning of wisdom, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. So if you have a fear of God, it makes you wise, and God will use you. Okay, I will continue. Verse 20, chapter 2, verse 20. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changeth the times and the seasons, removeth kings and setteth up kings. He giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. See, you know understanding, he gives it to you. Okay, continue. Verse 22. He revealeth the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. I thank thee and I praise thee, O thou God of my fathers, who hast given me wisdom and might, and hast made known unto me now what we desired of thee. For thou hast now made known unto us the king's matter. Verse 26. The king answered and said unto Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, or the soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. And notice Daniel then explains it in the language, and then he interprets it. Here we go. Or shall I say he recites it in the language and then interprets it, which is to explain it. Daniel chapter 2 verse 31, Daniel interprets the dream. Thou, O king, sawest and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were not of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Verse 36. This is the dream, and we will tell thee interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory, and wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of heaven hath he given into thy hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay, and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Verse 47, Daniel is promoted. The king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods, and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldest reveal this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the provinces of Babylon, but Daniel sat in the gate of the king. You know what it means to sit in the gate of the king is where you do judges. We saw this in the book of Ruth, and also I think with Absalom when he replaced David in the king and so forth when he conspired to take over from David. Okay, so Daniel chapters 2 verse 4 and Daniel chapters 2 verse 4 to Daniel chapter 7 verse 28 is in the Aramaic language. This will be explained to you in tomorrow's article. Chapters 2 verse 31 to 45, the common factor between all these four empires, Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece and Rome, is that they ruled different parts of the world, but Jerusalem was part of each empire and the gateway between the north and the south. The prophecy relating to the last part of the statue, the toes, coincide with Isaiah chapters 8 verses 14 and 15 and Matthew chapters 21 verse 44. Note, Daniel did not use the given names of his colleagues but continued to call them by their Hebrew names, as we should continue, or should I say revert to, because many don't use it, to call the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, Jehovah, Yahweh, whatever you want to call him, and Yeshua by their names and not Lord or Jesus, as the translators have changed our Bibles. Moving on to chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar's golden image, reading from verse 1. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold whose height was 80 cubits and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent together the princes, the governors and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the councillors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the province to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Verse 4. Then and Herod cried aloud, To you it is commanded, O people, nations and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, the harp, the sackbut, the psalmistry, the dulcier, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whosoever falleth not down and worshippeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. Therefore at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Chapter 8, the fiery furnace. Verse 8, the fiery furnace. Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made decrees that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and harp, and all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the provinces of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not you serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, and psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if you worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king of Nebuchadnezzar, We are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king. But if not, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Verse 10. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and basically they were thrown into the fire and they didn't burn, as you read, and so they got promoted. So to reduce the length of the study, you are expected to read the whole chapters from your Bibles. Verse 8 says, the Jews. Verse 12, certain Jews. Whether all the Jews except the four, Daniel and his 3 colleagues, gave in, or the leading 3 commanded the rest not to give in and were taken as examples, I shall leave to you. The point is they did not give in even under the pressure of a painful death. The same as the apostles who were killed. Matthew 10 verse 28. And fear not them which kill the body, but are not able to kill the soul. Rather fear him that which is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Note also the music was used to entice the worshipping of a false god. Same as today, in many congregations that have music as a big part, rather than studying the word. How many congregations where everyone opens their Bibles and read for an hour are there compared to hearing the explanation of a pastor who only takes 1 or 2 verses and then spends an hour or half an hour explaining, putting his own spin on those verses? Yet all the congregation know the words or tune to the worship songs. Tomorrow's post is an important one. Please try not to miss it. Shalom until we come again, God willing.